The Battle of Tau Ceti began not with massive fleet engagements, but with a single human courier ship dropping out of hyperspace directly in front of the hegemony's lead dreadnought. The small vessel transmitted a message that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "This is Commander Sarah Kim of the Human Defense Coalition. You are ordered to withdraw from Council space immediately." The hegemony commander's response was predictable. Weapons fire from a dozen ships converged on the courier's position. But Commander Kim had already jumped back into hyperspace. Her message delivered and the enemy's intentions confirmed beyond any doubt. "All units, weapons free," Marcus ordered from the command center. "Engage at will." What followed defied every military analysis the hegemony had conducted. Human forces didn't meet them in traditional formation battles. Instead, they implemented tactics that seemed chaotic but proved devastatingly effective. Small human squadrons appeared throughout the hegemony fleet using precision hyperspace jumps, striking at specific targets before vanishing again. Communications arrays, sensor clusters, and command bridges became priority targets. Within 30 minutes, the massive enemy fleet found itself partially blind and struggling to coordinate. "Admiral," reported Captain Martinez from the destroyer Defiant, "enemy dreadnought Dominator has lost primary communications. Their escort ships are falling back to defensive positions." Sarah monitored the intelligence network, watching as information flowed in from across the battlefield. "Marcus, the hegemony commanders are communicating through emergency channels. They're calling for reinforcements. How many additional ships? At least 50 more capital ships holding position 3 systems away. They expected this to be over quickly." Marcus studied the tactical display, noting the precise positioning of human forces. Despite being vastly outnumbered, they were winning through superior tactics and coordination. But the arrival of hegemony reinforcements would change the balance dramatically. "All human forces, implement Strategy 7, he ordered. Strategy 7 was something the couple had developed during their retirement years. A theoretical response to overwhelming enemy numbers. It had never been tested in actual combat, but the current situation left no alternatives. Human ships throughout the battle zone began coordinating their movements with unprecedented precision. Instead of fighting as individual units, they operated as components of a single massive entity. Each ship knew exactly where every other ship would be at any given moment, allowing for maneuvers that seemed impossible. The Valiant and Courage bracketed a hegemony cruiser, firing in perfect synchronization to overwhelm its shields. The moment the enemy ship was disabled, both human vessels were already moving to their next positions, leaving the cruiser for cleanup crews. "This is impossible," came a transmission from Admiral Chen Wei's flagship. "The hegemony fleet is 3 times our size, but they're fighting like confused amateurs." "That's because they're fighting the old war," Sarah explained over the communication link. "They prepared for fleet-to-fleet combat using traditional tactics. We're fighting a new kind of war." The transformation was visible on the tactical displays. Red indicators representing hegemony ships were steadily diminishing, while blue markers showing human forces continued to move in complex, coordinated patterns. But the most significant development was happening beyond the immediate battlefield. Other Council species, watching the engagement unfold, began mobilizing their own forces. The Centaurian Navy announced that it was moving to support human positions. The Rigel Defense Fleet launched every available ship toward the combat zone. "Admiral Reed," came a transmission from Counselor Vex-High. "The Council has voted unanimous support for human military leadership during this crisis. All member species are hereby placed under your operational command." Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing the same mixture of satisfaction and concern in her eyes. They had proven their point about military preparedness, but the cost was enormous. "Counselor, I appreciate the Council's confidence. However, I believe Admiral Chen is better suited for overall command of combined Council forces. My wife and I have more specialized roles to play." Before Vex-High could respond, new alerts filled the command center. The hegemony reinforcements had arrived, but they weren't advancing toward the battle. Instead, they were holding position at the edge of the system. "Admiral," reported the intelligence officer, "we're intercepting hegemony command communications. Their reinforcement commander is requesting permission to withdraw." Sarah activated her personal communicator, accessing the most sensitive intelligence network she had maintained. "I'm getting confirmation from assets within Hegemony High Command. Their leadership is debating whether to continue the offensive." "Why the hesitation?" Marcus asked. "Because Sarah replied with a slight smile. We did something they didn't expect. We won. The implications rippled across the galaxy. The hegemony had launched what they believed would be an overwhelming first strike against a weakened, divided council. Instead, they found themselves facing a unified response led by human tactical innovation and supported by every major species in council space. 3 hours after the first shots were fired, hegemony forces began withdrawing from council space. The invasion that was supposed to shatter galactic civilization had instead strengthened it. Marcus opened a channel to all human forces. This is Admiral Reed. Stand down from combat operations but maintain defensive positions. The immediate threat has passed. 2 days later, Sarah and Marcus stood in their greenhouse on Kepler Form 42b, examining the tomato plants that Commander Zektar's team had carefully maintained during their absence. The Zentorian commander had not only protected their research, but had documented everything, preparing a comprehensive report for the Council's Agricultural Committee. Admirals, Zektar said, I owe you an apology. When I arrived here, I thought I was dealing with regulatory violations. I had no idea I was threatening the people who would save galactic civilization. You were doing your job, Commander, Sarah replied. The fault lies with a system that prioritizes bureaucracy over common sense. Marcus handed Zektar a sealed container filled with seeds. These are the drought-resistant corn varieties we developed. The preliminary tests show they can increase crop yields by 40% on arid worlds. The Council has already approved emergency authorization for distribution of all your research, Zektar reported. 17 member worlds have requested immediate agricultural assistance. Sarah looked out over the fields they had spent 15 years cultivating. It's funny how quickly bureaucrats can move when their survival depends on it. Will you be returning to active military service? Zektar asked. Marcus and Sarah exchanged the same look they had shared at the beginning of this crisis. No, Commander. We've proven our point. The galaxy now understands that peace requires preparation, and diplomacy requires the credible threat of force. But more importantly, Sarah added, the galaxy now knows that humanity's greatest strength isn't our military capability. It's our willingness to use that capability in defense of others, rather than for conquest. As Zektar's ship departed, carrying seeds that would feed millions across the galaxy, Marcus put his arm around his wife's shoulders. Think they learned anything? Sarah smiled, picking a ripe tomato from the vine beside her. They learned that you should never attack someone's garden unless you're prepared to face the gardeners. The galaxy had indeed learned. In the years that followed, the hegemony would never again challenge council space. The member species would maintain adequate defensive forces, and 2 retired admirals would continue growing vegetables that would feed a peaceful galaxy, knowing that sometimes the best way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war. Within 6 hours of assuming command, Sarah had reactivated 17 intelligence cells across hegemony space, while Marcus coordinated the largest military mobilization in human history since the expansion wars. The command center at Kepler Station had transformed into a nerve center of galactic defense, with information flowing in from across known space. Admiral Chen, Sarah called out to her intelligence chief. What are we getting from the Rigel cell? Confirmation of our worst fears, came the reply. Hegemony High Command has issued mobilization orders to all reserve fleets. They're not just planning to test Council defenses. They're preparing for total war. Marcus stood before the primary tactical display, studying the 3-dimensional map of galactic space. Red indicators showed hegemony force concentrations, while blue markers represented Council and human defensive positions. The picture was not encouraging. They've been planning this for at least 5 years, he observed. Look at the positioning. They've managed to place major fleet elements within striking distance of every major Council world simultaneously. Admiral Torres approached with a priority communication from the Galactic Council. Marcus, you need to see this. The holographic message that appeared showed Councillor Vexhai, flanked by other senior council members. His expression was a mixture of anger and desperation. Admiral Reed, Admiral Chen, the Council demands an immediate explanation for your unauthorized reactivation of intelligence networks and military mobilization. Your actions are being interpreted as preparation for aggressive warfare, which violates multiple treaties. Sarah stepped into the hologram's range. Counselor, our intelligence networks have confirmed that the hegemony is preparing for a full-scale invasion of Council space. Every major world in the galaxy is under threat. Our diplomatic corps is in contact with hegemony leadership. They assure us that their fleet movements are purely defensive in nature. Marcus couldn't hide his disgust. Counselor, I've been analyzing hegemony military doctrine for 40 years. What you're calling defensive positioning is actually the final phase of offensive preparation. They will strike within the next 18 hours. The Council cannot authorize preemptive military action based on speculation. Then you're condemning billions of beings to death. Sarah replied bluntly. Counselor, I'm going to share something with you that will put this situation in perspective. She activated her personal communicator, accessing files that had been classified at the highest levels for decades. The holographic display shifted to show detailed intelligence reports, communication intercepts, and strategic analyses. 3 years ago, my dormant intelligence network detected the beginning of hegemony war preparations. 2 years ago, we identified their recruitment of mercenary fleets from the Outer Rim. 18 months ago, we documented their acquisition of advanced weapons technology from black market sources. The evidence was overwhelming. Document after document showed a clear pattern of aggressive preparation, with the hegemony systematically building the capability to overwhelm Council defenses. We tried to warn the Council through proper diplomatic channels, Marcus added. Every report was dismissed as human militaristic paranoia. We were told that the era of galactic warfare was over, that diplomatic solutions could resolve any conflict. Counselor Vexhi's expression had shifted from anger to growing alarm. Why wasn't this information shared with the full Council? Because, Sarah said with barely controlled frustration, every time we provided intelligence that contradicted the Council's preferred narrative, it was either ignored or used as evidence of human aggression. The Council wanted to believe in perpetual peace, so it refused to acknowledge evidence of impending war. Suddenly, alerts began flashing across every display in the command center. Commander Jackson's voice cut through the ambient noise. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Hegemony fleet emerging from hyperspace in the Tau Ceti system. The main tactical display updated to show dozens of red indicators appearing at the edge of Council space. The hegemony fleet was massive, over 200 ships ranging from fast attack vessels to massive dreadnoughts. They're not stopping at the buffer zone, reported Admiral Chen Wei from his position with the 3rd Battle Group. Hegemony forces are advancing directly toward civilian targets. Marcus was already issuing orders. All human forces implement Defense Plan Alpha immediately. Admiral Torres, signal the reserve fleets for emergency deployment. Admiral Reed. Counselor Vexhi's voice carried new urgency. The Council hereby grants you emergency command authority over all available military assets. Do whatever is necessary to protect civilian populations. Sarah looked at her husband, seeing the same grim determination that had made them legendary during their previous military careers. Marcus, we have 17 human ships against a hegemony fleet of over 200. The math doesn't look good. The math rarely does, Marcus replied. But we've beaten worse odds before. He turned to address the entire command center. Listen carefully, everyone. We're about to face the largest military threat in galactic history. The hegemony believes that Council disunity and human retirement has left the galaxy defenseless. They're about to learn why that assumption is incorrect. Sarah was coordinating with her intelligence networks, gathering real-time information about hegemony movements and intentions. Marcus, I'm getting reports from the inner systems. They're not just targeting military installations, they're heading directly for major population centers. Confirmed, Admiral Chen Wei reported. Hegemony fleet elements are on direct approach vectors to New Geneva, Rigel Prime, and Centauri Station. Estimated time to weapons range, 4 hours. The scope of the crisis was becoming clear. This wasn't a limited military engagement or a territorial dispute. The hegemony was attempting to destroy the Galactic Council by eliminating its major civilian centers and government installations. Marcus activated the general communication system, broadcasting to every human ship and station in the defense network. This is Admiral Reed. 20 years ago, we chose peace over war. We retired our fleets, reduced our military presence, and tried to show the galaxy that former enemies could become partners in civilization. His voice carried across space to thousands of human personnel who had never experienced large-scale warfare. Today we learn that peace requires guardians. The hegemony threatens not just human space, but every free civilization in the galaxy. We stand between them and the innocent. We will not fail. Sarah concluded the broadcast. To every human ship, every human crew, every human citizen, today we remind the galaxy why humanity earned its place among the stars. Not through conquest, but through our willingness to defend what is right no matter the cost. The die was cast. Within hours, human forces would engage a vastly superior enemy in defense of a galactic civilization that had often questioned their motives and methods. The outcome would determine not just the survival of human space, but the future of galactic democracy itself. The Coalition courier ship Prometheus cut through hyperspace at maximum velocity, its quantum drives pushing the boundaries of safe travel. In the ship's command briefing room, Sarah and Marcus sat across from Admiral Torres via holographic link, their faces illuminated by tactical displays showing the developing crisis. The situation is worse than we initially reported, Torres began, her expression grim. Our deep space monitoring stations detected hegemony ships performing reconnaissance sweeps along the entire frontier. This isn't just a probe. It's preparation for a full-scale invasion. Sarah studied the tactical data flowing across her display. After 20 years of retirement, the familiar patterns of military intelligence felt both foreign and natural, like speaking a language she hadn't used in decades. Their timing is deliberate, she observed. The Council's fleet is scattered across 12 different peacekeeping missions. Human forces are undermanned due to the recent downsizing. They've been planning this for years. Marcus leaned forward, his strategic mind already analyzing possibilities. What's our current force disposition? 3 battle groups in the contested zone, 2 more in reserve at Terra Nova, and scattered patrol squadrons throughout human space. Against the hegemony's mobilization, we're outnumbered 3-1. The numbers were sobering, but both retired admirals had faced worse odds during the expansion wars. What concerned them more was the political dimension of the crisis. What's the Council's official position? Sarah asked. They're still debating, Torres replied with obvious frustration. The emergency session has been arguing for 6 hours about proper procedures for responding to military threats. Meanwhile, the hegemony continues to advance. Marcus shook his head in disgust. This is exactly why the human colonies chose semi-autonomous status. The Council's inability to make timely decisions has been a liability for decades. There's another complication, Torres continued. Our intelligence network has been largely dismantled over the past 5 years. When you went into retirement, Sarah, most of your information sources went dark. We're essentially blind to hegemony intentions beyond their obvious military movements. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. My network wasn't dismantled, she said finally. It was just put to sleep. Most of my assets are still in place, they're just not actively reporting. Can you reactivate them? Given time, yes. But it would require me to personally contact each cell leader. The security protocols I established don't allow for remote activation. The Prometheus shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace near the Coalition's primary military base at Kepler Station. Through the viewports, they could see the massive space installation bustling with activity as ships prepared for potential combat operations. As they docked, Marcus received an urgent communication on his personal channel. The face that appeared on his communicator was familiar. Admiral Chen Wei, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, commander of the 3rd Battle Group. Admiral Reed, thank the stars you're back. We've got reports of hegemony advanced scouts already in the buffer zone. They're not waiting for their main fleet. How many ships? 15 fast attack vessels moving in stealth configuration. They're testing our response times and defensive capabilities. Sarah looked up from her own tactical analysis. That's classic hegemony doctrine. They send scouts to probe defenses, then use that intelligence to plan their main assault. Marcus was already shifting into command mode. Admiral Chen, maintain defensive positions but do not engage unless directly threatened. We need to understand their intentions before we escalate the situation. Understood, sir. But Marcus, there's something else. The Council has sent an official communication demanding that all human military forces stand down and allow Council peacekeepers to handle the situation. The silence that followed was filled with implications. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. both understanding the political nightmare that was developing. They want us to withdraw our defenses while they debate proper procedures, Marcus said flatly. That's the essence of it. Yes. Torres's hologram flickered as the communication updated to include her from the station's command center. The Council seems to believe that human military preparations are what's provoking the hegemony advance. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. After 40 years of military service, I've learned one fundamental truth about politics. When faced with a choice between reality and ideology, politicians will choose ideology every time. What are your orders, Admiral? Chenwei asked. Marcus considered for a moment. The decision he made in the next few seconds could determine the fate of human space, and possibly the entire galactic political structure. Admiral Chen, you will maintain your defensive positions in accordance with the mutual defense treaties signed with the frontier colonies. The Galactic Council's authority does not supersede humanity's right to defend its sovereign territory. That's going to cause a diplomatic crisis, Torres warned. Elena, Sarah said, we already have a diplomatic crisis. The question is whether we'll have a military defeat to go with it. As they disembarked from the Prometheus, they were met by Commander Jackson, Torres's chief of staff, who handed them updated intelligence reports. The documents painted a clear picture. The hegemony was not just probing human defenses, they were systematically testing the response capabilities of all Council member species. They're planning something much larger than just an attack on human space, Sarah realized as she reviewed the data. This is preparation for a campaign against the entire Galactic Council, which means, Marcus added, that the Council's paralysis isn't just endangering humanity, it's endangering everyone. They made their way to the station's primary command center, a vast chamber filled with holographic displays showing the disposition of forces across 100 light-years of space. Officers and technicians worked frantically to coordinate defensive preparations while navigating the conflicting directives from various political authorities. Admirals, Torres said as they entered, I need to know your intentions. Are you resuming active command? Or are you here in an advisory capacity? Sarah looked around the command center, taking in the organized chaos of military preparation. She could feel the weight of command settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar burden. Elena, she said finally, 20 years ago we retired because we believed the galaxy had learned to choose diplomacy over warfare. We were wrong. The galaxy chose bureaucracy over both diplomacy and effective defense. Marcus nodded in agreement. We're resuming active command effective immediately, and we're going to remind everyone, the hegemony, the Council, and anyone else who's forgotten, why humanity earned its place at the galactic table. As they waited for the diplomatic team to arrive, an unexpected development changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Sarah's personal communicator chimed with an emergency alert, not from the Galactic Council, but from the Human Defense Coalition's Deep Space Monitoring Network. Admiral Chen, the automated voice announced, Priority Alpha communication incoming from Frontier Command. Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus. Priority Alpha communications were reserved for the most critical situations. Imminent threats to human space or major galactic crises, accept communication, she ordered. The holographic display that materialized showed Admiral Torres, current head of the Human Defense Coalition, her face grave with concern. Sarah, thank God we found you. We need both you and Marcus back immediately. Elena, we're in the middle of a rather delicate situation here, Sarah replied, gesturing toward the enforcement troops who were still maintaining their positions around the farmhouse. The hegemony has mobilized their fleet, Torres continued, referencing humanity's most dangerous enemy. 3 battle groups heading toward the contested systems. Our intelligence suggests they're planning to test the Council's resolve while the human fleet is dispersed on peacekeeping missions. Marcus stepped into the hologram's range. How long do we have? 72 hours before they reach the buffer zone. Sarah, we need your intelligence network active again. And Marcus, we need you to coordinate the defense strategy. Zektar, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, activated his own communicator. Council Command, we have a developing situation. The hegemony appears to be mobilizing for military action. The response was immediate and panicked. Confirm that information, Commander. The human admirals are receiving real-time intelligence about hegemony fleet movements. 3 battle groups heading toward contested space. Within moments, the council's communication channel exploded with activity. Multiple voices spoke simultaneously, creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. The bureaucratic organization that had seemed so powerful when confronting two farmers was suddenly revealing its fundamental weakness when faced with a real crisis. "Councillor Vexhai," Sarah called out, "are you still monitoring this channel?" "Yes, Admiral Chen. The council is convening an emergency session to address this threat." "How long will that take?" A pause. "Standard procedure requires 48 hours to properly convene all member representatives." Marcus laughed grimly. "By the time you finish your procedures, the hegemony will have already struck. This is exactly why we retired. The council's inability to act decisively in crisis situations." Sarah was already moving toward the farmhouse, her demeanor shifting from peaceful retiree to military commander. "Elena will need transport to the nearest coalition base. How quickly can you get a ship here?" "Fast courier is already en route," Torres replied. "ETA 90 minutes. "Wait," Zektar interjected, his forearms gesturing frantically. "You cannot simply leave. You are still under investigation for regulatory violations." Both admirals stopped and turned to face the Zentarian commander. The look in their eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. "Commander," Sarah said in a voice that could freeze supernovas, "in 90 minutes we will be departing this planet to help defend galactic civilization from an aggressive expansionist power. You have 3 choices. You can help us, you can stay out of our way, or you can try to stop us. If you choose the third option," Marcus added, "you will be interfering with critical defense operations during a time of galactic crisis. That would make you, legally speaking, a combatant against human interests." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The enforcement commander understood that he was facing a decision that could define the rest of his career, and possibly his life. Detaining 2 legendary military commanders during a galactic emergency would be career suicide at best, and could potentially be considered an act of war. His communicator crackled again. "Commander Zektar, new orders from the Council Emergency Committee. You will provide any assistance required to Admirals Chen and Reed. Their regulatory status is suspended pending resolution of the current crisis." Relief flooded through Zektar's expression. "Acknowledged, Council Command." Sarah was already in the farmhouse, gathering specific items from what appeared to be a hidden command center. Sophisticated communication equipment, encrypted data storage devices, and personal effects that suggested the couple had been maintaining their connections to the intelligence community, despite their official retirement. 20 years of research, Marcus said to Zektar, gesturing toward the greenhouse. 20 years of developing agricultural solutions that could feed billions of beings across the galaxy. We were going to present it to the Council next month as a gift to galactic civilization. What will happen to the research now? That depends, Sarah replied, emerging from the house with a military-grade equipment pack. On whether the hegemony crisis can be resolved quickly, and whether the Council is interested in actual solutions rather than bureaucratic control. She paused, looking back at the greenhouse and the fields they had spent 15 years cultivating. Zektar, I'm going to make you an offer. Your team can remain here and guard our research. Study it, document it, understand what we've accomplished. When this crisis is over, you can present the findings to the Council. Why would you trust us with something so valuable? Marcus smiled. Because whether we return from this mission or not, this research needs to survive. It's too important to be lost to politics or bureaucracy. The sound of atmospheric entry began to rumble in the distance, the coalition courier ship arriving ahead of schedule. Sarah and Marcus gathered the last of their essential equipment, their movements efficient and purposeful. Commander, Sarah said as they prepared to leave, there's something you should understand about humans. We don't fight because we love war. We fight because we love peace. And sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war. The courier ship touched down in the same field where the enforcement vessels had landed, its sleek design and advanced weapons systems making the Council ships look primitive by comparison. The message was subtle but clear. This was not a diplomatic vessel but a tool of war. As they walked toward the ship, Marcus turned back to Zektar. Take care of our tomatoes, Commander. The galaxy is going to need them. Zektar's communication device crackled to life, interrupting the tense standoff. The voice that emerged was sharp and impatient. speaking in the formal dialect of the Galactic Council's ruling committee. Commander Zektar, report your status immediately. Why has the operation taken longer than projected? The Zentaurian looked at the device, then at the two humans standing calmly before him, their military credentials still glowing in holographic display. He could feel the weight of his career, possibly his life, hanging in the balance of his next words. Council Command, this is Zektar. The situation has become complicated. Complicated how? You are dealing with two elderly agricultural workers. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Commander, may I speak with your superiors? Zektar hesitated for a moment, then activated the external speaker. Council Command Admiral Sarah Chen requests communication. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. When the voice returned, it carried a different tone entirely, one of barely controlled panic. Admiral Chen is dead. She died in classified operations over 2 decades ago. Reports of my death, Sarah said with the same slight smile her husband had used earlier, have been greatly exaggerated. I am very much alive, and I am very much displeased with this unprovoked attack on my home. Impossible. Provide authentication. Sarah's fingers danced over her communicator, sending encrypted codes that hadn't been used in 20 years. The response was immediate, a complex musical sequence that confirmed her identity beyond any doubt. Another long silence, followed by hushed voices speaking in the background. Finally, a new voice came through the communication system, older, more refined, carrying the weight of high office. Admiral Chen, this is Counselor Vex-High of the ruling committee. We were not informed of your survival or current location. That was intentional, Counselor. My husband and I chose to retire quietly. We wanted no fanfare, no ceremonial positions, no continued involvement in galactic politics. We simply wanted to live in peace. Marcus activated his own communicator, adding his signal to the communication. Counselor Vex-High, this is Admiral Reed. I believe you and I spoke at the signing of the Centauri Accords. Admiral Reed. The surprise in the counselor's voice was evident, even through the universal translator. Yes, I remember our conversation. You expressed hope that the treaty would allow humanity to focus on peaceful pursuits. And it has, Marcus replied. For 20 years, we've been pursuing agricultural research that could benefit every species in the galaxy. Your enforcement team has just threatened to destroy that work. Through their communication devices, they could hear the sounds of frantic activity, multiple voices speaking in urgent tones, the rapid clicking of data terminals, the hum of quantum processors working at maximum capacity. The Galactic Council's bureaucracy was clearly in crisis mode. Meanwhile, in the field, the enforcement troops remained frozen in position. Their training had prepared them for resistance from criminals, terrorists, or political dissidents. It had not prepared them for the possibility that their targets might be legendary military heroes with the power to start or prevent galactic wars. Counselor, Sarah continued, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about our work here. We're not violating biological regulations, we're advancing them. Our intelligence indicated that you were cultivating prohibited Earth-strain genetic material. Your intelligence was partially correct, Marcus admitted. We are working with original Earth genetics, but we're not preserving them in their original form. We've been adapting them, improving them, making them compatible with non-human biology. Sarah gestured toward the greenhouse visible behind them. Would you like to see the results of our research? Zektar looked uncertain. His orders had been clear: secure the biological materials and arrest the suspects. But those orders had been based on the assumption that the suspects were simple farmers, not two of the most respected military minds in galactic history. Counselor, he said into his communicator, the subjects are requesting permission to demonstrate their research. Another pause, more hushed conversation in the background. Commander Zektar, maintain your position but do not take any aggressive action. We are dispatching a diplomatic team immediately. How long until they arrive? Sarah asked. Approximately 6 hours, came the reply. Marcus looked at his wife, then back at the enforcement team. 6 hours is a long time to stand in a field pointing weapons at each other. Why don't we use that time productively? He walked slowly toward the greenhouse, his movements careful and non-threatening. The enforcement troops tracked him with their weapons but didn't fire. Sarah followed, and after a moment's hesitation, so did Zektar. The greenhouse was larger than it appeared from the outside, with carefully controlled climate zones and sophisticated growing equipment that seemed far more advanced than anything simple farmers would need. Row upon row of plants grew in precisely monitored conditions, each section labeled with complex genetic notation. "This is Sector 1, Sarah explained, stopping beside a collection of tomato plants that seemed somehow more vibrant than normal varieties. "These are descended from Earth-origin tomatoes, but they've been modified to grow in the mineral-poor soil typical of Rigel colony worlds." She picked one of the ripe fruits and handed it to Zektar. "This tomato contains 30% more nutritional content than standard Galactic varieties, requires 60% less water to grow, and can survive in temperatures that would kill conventional crops." The Zentarian examined the fruit with all four eyes, his scientific curiosity beginning to overcome his military caution. "How is this possible?" "Earth plants evolved over millions of years to survive in extremely diverse conditions," Marcus explained. "That genetic diversity is their strength. We've been isolating the beneficial traits and enhancing them through controlled breeding and genetic modification." They moved to the next section, where corn stalks grew in what appeared to be pure sand. "This corn can grow in desert conditions that would be impossible for current Galactic varieties," Sarah continued. "It could turn barren worlds into agricultural centers." Zektar's communication device crackled again. "Commander, what is your current status?" "Council Command. The subjects are demonstrating their agricultural research. The claims they made appear to be accurate." "Explain." "They have developed crops that could revolutionize Galactic agriculture. If their research is genuine, it could solve food security issues for dozens of member worlds." The enforcement commander was beginning to understand that he had walked into something far more complex than a simple biological weapons case. These weren't criminals hiding dangerous materials. They were scientists who had been working in isolation to solve some of the galaxy's most pressing problems. "The question," Sarah said quietly, "is whether the Galactic Council is interested in solutions, or whether they prefer to maintain the status quo." Commander Zektar gestured sharply with his upper right arm, and his troops began their advance. The enforcement soldiers moved in a standard pincer formation, their plasma weapons charged and ready. To them, this was routine. 2 aging humans against a full squad of Council elite forces. The outcome seemed inevitable. Sarah watched their approach with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless military operations. The troops were well-trained but predictable, following textbook assault patterns that she and Marcus had helped develop decades ago. She noted their spacing, their weapon positions, the way their commander positioned himself safely behind the main force. "Zektar," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the field with surprising authority. "Tell me, what do you know about the siege of Proxima Station?" The Zentorian commander paused mid-gesture, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. "What does that have to do with anything? Or the liberation of the Kepler mining colonies?" Sarah added, taking a step forward. "The defense of New Geneva, the Battle of the Outer Rim." Several of the enforcement troops had stopped advancing, uncertainty creeping into their movements. These weren't the names that simple farmers would know, let alone reference with such casual familiarity. These were legendary military engagements from the human expansion wars, battles that had shaped the current Galactic political landscape. "You're stalling," Zektar declared, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "Squad Alpha, continue the advance." Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He withdrew what appeared to be a simple communication device, but Sarah knew it was much more than that. It was a quantum-encrypted transmitter, military-grade, capable of reaching the highest levels of human command structure. "Computer," Marcus spoke into the device. "Emergency authentication protocol, verification code, Tango 77 Delta." A melodic chime sounded from the device, followed by a crisp feminine voice. "Authentication confirmed. Good morning, Admiral Reed. How may we assist you today?" The effect on the enforcement squad was immediate and dramatic. Every weapon lowered slightly as the troops processed what they had just heard. Admiral Reed. Not Marcus Reed, retired farmer, but Admiral Marcus Reed. Zektar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Impossible. Admiral Reed died 20 years ago in the final engagement at Titan Station." "Reports of my death," Marcus said with a slight smile, "were greatly exaggerated. Computer, please display my current military status." A holographic projection materialized above the communicator, showing the official seal of the Human Defense Coalition and a detailed service record. Admiral Marcus Reed, Supreme Commander of Strategic Operations, officially listed as retired but retaining emergency command authority. 43 years of service, veteran of every major engagement in human space. Sarah stepped forward, producing her own communicator. Computer authentication protocol. Verification code Whiskey 95 Alpha. Another chime, another confirmation. Authentication confirmed. Good morning, Admiral Chen, standing by for orders. The second hologram appeared, showing an equally impressive service record. Admiral Sarah Chen, Chief of Intelligence Operations, architect of the human intelligence network that had prevented 3 separate galactic wars through careful diplomacy and strategic information gathering. 2 of the most decorated military officers in human history, Sarah said calmly, living quietly on a farm, growing heritage vegetables, and bothering absolutely no one. The enforcement troops were now openly staring at their commanders, waiting for orders that weren't coming. Sector seemed frozen, his 4 eyes darting between the holograms and the 2 humans who had just revealed themselves to be among the most dangerous military minds in the galaxy. This changes nothing, the Zentorian finally managed. You're still in violation of Council regulations. Your rank doesn't grant you immunity from galactic law. Actually, Marcus said, his tone becoming more formal, it does. Computer display current treaty obligations regarding retired human military personnel. A third hologram appeared, showing the text of the Centauri Accords, the treaty that had ended the last major galactic conflict. Article 7, Section 12 was highlighted in glowing text. All retired human military personnel above the rank of colonel retain diplomatic immunity and are to be considered protected persons under galactic law. Furthermore, Sarah added, any attempt to detain, arrest, or harm such personnel will be considered an act of war against the Human Defense Coalition. The silence that followed was deafening. The wind continued to rustle through the crops, but every other sound seemed to have stopped. The enforcement troops looked to their commander for guidance, but Zektar appeared to be struggling with the implications of what he had just learned. You've been living here for 15 years, he said slowly. Why didn't you identify yourselves when we first arrived? Because, Sarah replied, we're retired. We chose this life because we were tired of war, tired of politics, tired of the endless cycle of conflict that seems to define galactic civilization. All we wanted was to grow our vegetables and live in peace. The seeds you're protecting, Zektar continued, they're not just agricultural specimens, are they? Marcus nodded gravely. They're the genetic heritage of humanity, the original strains that fed our species for millennia before we reached the stars. We've been preserving them not as weapons but as a gift to the galaxy. Imagine crops that could grow in environments where current strains fail, that could feed billions more beings with better nutrition and resistance to disease. But the regulations clearly state, the regulations, Sarah interrupted, were written by bureaucrats who've never faced starvation, who've never seen entire colonies fail, because their crops couldn't adapt to local conditions. Marcus and I have spent the last 15 years not just preserving these genetic lines, but improving them, making them suitable for dozens of different alien environments. She gestured toward the fields around them. Every plant you see here has been carefully modified to be safe for non-human consumption, while retaining its beneficial properties. We've been planning to present our research to the Council's Agricultural Development Committee next month. Zektar lowered his weapon completely, and his troops followed suit. You could have simply filed the proper paperwork, obtained the correct permits. We tried, Marcus said with a bitter laugh. 5 years ago, we submitted our initial research proposal. It was rejected without review twice. The Council's Xenobiology Committee declared that human genetic material was inherently suspicious and unlikely to benefit non-human species. So, we decided to prove them wrong, Sarah added, to develop the science first and present irrefutable evidence later. The enforcement commander stood in the middle of the field, surrounded by his troops, facing 2 of the most legendary military figures in recent galactic history. The simple arrest operation he had planned was rapidly becoming a diplomatic nightmare that could have far-reaching consequences for the entire Galactic Council. The morning sun filtered through the greenhouse windows as Sarah Chen carefully tended to her tomato plants. Her weathered hands moved with practiced precision, checking each vine for signs of disease or pest damage. At 62, she had spent the last 15 years perfecting her small farm on the outer rim planet of Kepler 442b, far from the bustling trade routes and political machinations of the inner systems. "Marcus, the irrigation system in Sector 7 is acting up again," she called to her husband, who was bent over a collection of ancient earth seeds he'd been cataloging for the local agricultural database. Marcus looked up from his work, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. At 65, his hair had gone completely silver, but his blue eyes still held the same intensity that had captivated Sarah when they first met at the Terra Nova Agricultural College 40 years ago. "I'll take a look after lunch. Probably just needs a new filter." Their life on Kepler 442b was simple and peaceful. They grew heritage vegetables and fruits, supplied the local colony with fresh produce, and spent their evenings reading or playing chess by the fireplace. To their neighbors, they were just another retired couple who had chosen the quiet life of farming over the chaos of the inner worlds. The first sign of trouble came as a low rumble in the distance. Sarah straightened, shading her eyes as she looked toward the horizon. 3 sleek ships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls bearing the distinctive golden emblem of the Galactic Council Enforcement Division. Marcus emerged from the greenhouse, his expression troubled. "Council ships. They rarely come this far out unless there's trouble." The ships landed in the field beyond their property line, crushing several rows of Sarah's prized corn. Dozens of armored figures emerged, their weapons already drawn. The lead figure, a tall Centaurian with purple skin and 4 arms, approached their modest farmhouse with obvious authority. "You are Sarah Chen and Marcus Reed, human citizens registered as agricultural workers on this planet." The Centaurian's voice carried the mechanical undertone of a universal translator. "That's right," Marcus replied calmly, though Sarah noticed his hand instinctively move toward the old tool shed, where they kept their farming equipment. "What can we do for you, Commander?" "I am Enforcement Commander Zektar. You are under arrest for crimes against the Galactic Council, specifically the unauthorized possession and distribution of restricted biological materials." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The heritage seeds. Someone had reported them for growing Earth-origin plants without proper council permits. The bureaucracy of the Galactic Council was notorious for its complex regulations regarding biological materials, especially anything originating from humanity's homeworld. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, stepping forward. "We have all the proper documentation for our crops. Everything we grow is registered with the local agricultural authority." Commander Zektar's 4 eyes narrowed. "Your permits are for standard colony-approved variants. Our intelligence indicates you have been cultivating pure Earth-strain genetic material, which is classified as a potential biological weapon under Council Regulation 847 Delta." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "Biological weapons? Commander, we're growing tomatoes and corn. The same varieties our ancestors grew on Earth for thousands of years." "Silence," Zektar barked. "The genetic purity of Earth-origin species makes them unpredictable and potentially dangerous to non-human biology. You will surrender all seeds, samples, and research data immediately, or we will be forced to take them by force." Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look. In that brief moment, something passed between them. A silent communication built on decades of marriage and shared experiences. Sarah's neighbors had always wondered about the couple's unusually extensive knowledge of galactic politics and military tactics for simple farmers. They'd never questioned why 2 agricultural workers possessed such sophisticated security systems, or why their modest farmhouse contained communication equipment capable of reaching the inner systems. "We can't do that, Commander," Marcus said quietly. "Then you leave us no choice." Zektar raised his primary weapon, a plasma rifle that hummed with deadly energy. "Squad Alpha, secure the biological materials. Squad Beta, prepare the detention pods." The enforcement troops began advancing on the farmhouse. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with something she hadn't experienced in years, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat. She glanced at Marcus, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Commander," Sarah called out, her voice carrying a new edge of authority that made several of the troops pause. "I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw your forces and leave our property." Zektar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "You dare threaten a council enforcement operation? You're nothing but retired agricultural workers on a backwater planet." "We're retired, yes, Marcus said, his own voice taking on a harder tone. But we weren't always farmers. Something in their demeanor had changed. The way they stood, the confidence in their voices, the subtle shift in how they positioned themselves relative to cover and potential threats. The more observant members of Zektar's team began to look uncertain. "Your threats mean nothing," Zektar declared, though his voice carried less conviction than before. "You will comply, or you will be eliminated as threats to galactic security." Sarah smiled, and it wasn't the gentle expression her neighbors were accustomed to seeing. It was the smile of someone who had faced down far more dangerous enemies than a squad of council enforcement troops. "Commander," she said softly, "you really should have done more research before coming here." The tension in the air was palpable. The enforcement troops could sense that something had shifted, though they couldn't quite identify what. Their targets were still just two elderly humans standing in front of a modest farmhouse. But somehow the dynamic of the entire situation had changed. In the distance, the wind rustled through the crops that Sarah and Marcus had spent years cultivating. Hidden among the heritage tomatoes and ancient corn varieties were secrets that the Galactic Council couldn't begin to imagine. Not just rare genetic material, but the carefully preserved legacy of humanity's agricultural heritage, maintained by two people who understood its true value far better than any bureaucrat in the inner systems.